So, what we saw at Milnerton High wasn't just bullying, it was a mirror held up to a culture that's been ignored for far too long. And we know this in South Africa. 8 boys suspended, a child assaulted, filmed, and humiliated. And behind that, a system that keeps saying, we didn't see it coming. Tonight, we are not going to look away. We are actually going to talk about this. Face it. I'm joined by Dr. Sheetal Bula. She's an academic at the University of Zululand. She's a national columnist. You might have read her work. She's a director at Stellar Maths, and she's going to help unpack what lies beneath these violent rituals that we see in our schools and give us an indication of what she believes we should do to change the environment that we live in so that our children can be safe, so that our children can be seen, and that they can be believed. And if you have an opinion about what we've seen this last 72 hours transpire at Milnerton High and in South Africa, the conversations that's been had and the conversations that has been ignored, I want you to weigh in. I want you to share your opinion. I want you to grapple with us to understand what is happening in our country. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Dr. Sheetal. I know you had a look at this video and you have done research extensively in South Africa. What does this reveal about the social hierarchies in our schools? Because you touch on hierarchies in the work that you have done, and when you speak about bullying and you speak about the culture in our schools.
Look, it's a difficult one, and we can't take a broad paintbrush and paint every school with the same organizational culture. Every school is unique, whether it's private, semi-private, depending on the environment as well. And I must tell you this as well, schools in rural areas as well, they function, operate very differently from schools in urban settings, for instance. And there's multiple contributing factors that help develop a school into an organizational functional approach and culture. The basics, if we have to understand the basics of any school, right? The school's culture is often developed on practices and behaviors that become repetitive. When a behavior becomes repetitive, it becomes normalized, and then it becomes acceptable in society. So that is the first thing about understanding how, to such an extent at this point in our lives, we are post-democracy, that bullying had to become so violent. It's escalated and started at a point. I personally believe it would have definitely started off in the non-physical form of bullying, and that is verbal abuse. So manipulation, threats, abusive with sarcasm, for instance, right? Mockery, insults, personal verbal attacks between learners, for instance. So my challenge to educators sitting in these scenarios, if we're going to overlook that at the onset, it becomes a normative practice. It's okay. You know what? I can swear this foot. I can swear my brother on that end. And no one's going to do anything for it. I'm not accountable for it at any given point. The educator is not going to reprimand me for it or put it into perspective. And so often you find research has indicated this as well. Verbal abuse is actually the initiating point that escalates into physical abuse. The other challenge that we're having as well is bilingualism, multilingualism, where you find in some school areas, and I say here again, it's not every school in South Africa, where you find you still have racial divisions or division of friendships along the racial lines. So what actually happens during that time? We're mimicking the division within the schools based on race and ethnic groups. So you find that among a particular ethnic group, their native tongue or indigenous language is still kept alive, it's well spoken. You may have an Afrikaans speaking group on the other hand that will not understand a word of isiZulu or Xhosa or any of the African indigenous languages, for instance, right? I proposed this in one of my opinion pieces in the media as well, that perhaps multilingualism, bilingualism is actually an approach to combat uh, verbal abuse within schools that escalate to this extent in terms of, and it will also contribute towards an environment, a school culture of brotherhood and
Mm,
sisterhood.
mm.
And I think the key platform for communication is that people need to understand each other. And this starts at a very young age, and it starts at schools. And if you also look at the home environment of learners, yes, the child spends approximately 6 hours a day at school, for instance, but also we also need to consider what environment is the child living in at home, what is permissible. And I think let's start at the very beginning. Are individuals, are we, South African society, calling out bullying for what it is? Or
Mm.
are we teaching our children to actually just stomach it and move on? So when you
Yes.
accustom and you introduce your child to just being, okay, you know what? It's part of life. Handle it, let it
Yes.
go. Don't make an issue
Yes.
about it. And many parents are
Mm.
guilty of this. You teach your child, you know what? Don't go and fight. Don't go and stand up for yourself. And in the long term, you actually
Yes.
become far more tolerable of what you should not be tolerant of.
But also complicit because you are feeding that environment where you say, well, let's just tolerate it, muckle down, focus on why you're at the school. But because we don't address it, it escalates, it festers, and it becomes the norm that this is how things are done and what's acceptable in those environments.
Look, if you it's and this is across all sectors in life. If you look at the concept of patriarchy, for instance, I mean, women perpetuate patriarchy. You are taught to be tolerant of your husband. You are taught to be tolerant of the male's wants and demands, for instance, and
Mm.
you become complicit in their multiple forms of bullying. In the same thing, if you look at the corporate organizations and the white collar workers with the senior employees, management teams, junior employees, you become fall into a cultural way of thinking and behaving according to being dominated in every sphere. So we also need to be very careful in terms what kind of learner are we actually developing as a South African society. Ultimately, we want a critical thinker. We want an active
Mm.
citizenry one day. We want a citizenry that's going to question what's right, what's wrong, um, call out what should be called out. And I think this is the beginning point of shaping the mind of a very young and the future South Africans. And if we could shape this as well, it also has a great long term impact of good governance in the country. Eradicating, calling out corruption, whistleblowers, um, and that kind of pattern and thinking and behavior should actually be the focal point in terms of development of a young mind into the young adult in South Africa.
Dr. Shital, when you look at this video and you see how this boy was tortured and assaulted, the weapons used, is this what we see in schools? Is it just actually a reflection of what is happening in our society?
Look, in response to that, what I wanted all the listeners and yourself to be aware of, and I'm going to tell you to what, in a certain extent, bullying in all its variances and typologies has been a single cause as to why there is a great dropout. So, the Zero Dropout campaign indicated basically in 2024 that approximately 40% of learners who enroll in grade 1 in South Africa drop out before completing grade 12. And that is because of bullying. Yes, it's one of many reasons. Then I also want to point out to you that you're looking at approximately 60% of learners that actually experience some sort of bullying experience within the school scenario. We also need to be mindful about the fact that different scenarios call upon different behavior from learners. A learner may be a victim of bullying, and in another scenario, a perpetrator of bullying as well. So we also need to understand what is the stimulus? What is the
Mm.
stimulus that encourages this kind of behavior? So it's quite a complex situation we're dealing with. But if we look at Milnerton Boys High, what has cultivated there? It is beyond sad. It demonstrates a complete lack of disrespect for human beings, for one another, goes against our constitution, what we stand for, and more importantly, the fact that the situation escalated to this point where it was orchestrated to have access and planned to a bat, for instance. There was a belt used as well in the incident as well.
Yes, hose
And
pipe as well.
yes, and it, from what I understand as well, in terms of the media publications, it was publicized that the victim was also a cancer survivor
Yes. Finished in remission right
in
now and
remission.
finished, yeah. And that it would explain the scene where he is literally begging them to stop. Because you know, when you've gone through countless therapy sessions, countless chemotherapy sessions, what that does to the body, but what that does to the mind as well.
And the other reality is also, and this has been researched by scholars and not myself in academic scholarly publications, where they talk about 65% incidence of bullying at school is not even nearly reported. And of that percentage of those that are reported, it's often those incidents that are physically seen that are reported. When we talk about the emotional abuse, the verbal abuse, all of that falls to the wayside. It is underplayed, undermined, but yet often that is where the antagonism begins, the sarcasm begins,
Mhm.
you know, that kind of thing. As a child, we used to sing that song. I think you may have,
Sticks
Sticks
and
and
stones
Stones.
may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. But it does.
That's right. Name, and they stay with you all through your life. The insults,
Absolutely.
names, and it also, this is where it impacts a learner's self-esteem, confidence levels. As a young child, you are imbibing everything around you. Actually, start questioning your worth. And
True.
that's the biggest problem. And then you find children at schools, especially that come from impoverished backgrounds, actually questioning their own ability. Can they actually continue with the schooling curriculum and complete and matriculate? So
And
we need to
when you
look at firstly identifying a behavior type. How, and in my opinion as well, also, we've got a lot to do as South Africans, really a lot. My personal stance is educators, number one, should not be inundated with overly large classes. Because the
Mhm.
larger the class, the less likely, as an educator, you're going to know your learners. The smaller the class, you are actually able to identify learners that may have a tendency that can be a bit towards bullish or a stronger personality or a domineering personality, and and also be more vigilant when it comes to the learner engagement.
Mm.
Boys especially. Look, you've got to deal with your psychological hormonal imbalances and changes during the teenage years. I know for a fact as well. I've got this beautiful niece, she's at university now, but also at high school, there was this cattiness that went on amongst the sisters. So we need to look at the foundation in terms of what are we teaching our learners? How are
Mm.
educators cultivating and contributing towards the true essence of building sisterhood and brotherhood at schools? And are schools now really communities? I know many of us, if we finished off school earlier in the earlier years in the 90s, schools were safe spaces. They were generally
Yeah.
safe spaces. Is it a safe space?
What
But
do we
I think
say?
the reality is also it's a holistic framework. It's a holistic project. It's a project that's going to require educators, school governance, um, good governance in school, and a change in terms of what educators are required to do.
Mhm.
So also, if you look at the system that we have, so you've got your matriculant, they get accepted into a teachers training college, or they go into university, they complete a bachelor's of education for a 3 to 4 year degree and what have you. Then they're going into their obviously their community service and they're hitting the schools. Sometimes these educators are young. They lack the capacity and experience and also probably the inability to deal with these kind of circumstances and scenarios and bullying. My question also is, how responsive are our learners towards the instructions that educators give them? If there happens to be a bickering situation or argument that happens between learners, are educators vigilant to identify, look, there's a nasty scenario brewing there. I've got to make a mental note of this. This argument can escalate and carry on for days on end. And I've heard lots of scenarios where, for example, there's stealing of lunches that happens post after an argument. There's a bit of nastiness. The kids' homework gets stolen. And my challenge is, how are we monitoring this? How are we evaluating all of this? How are we curbing this?
What have you seen in your work? Because there's these videos that we've now seen, other videos where other victims have come forward and said, but they've also been at the brunt of these assaults, and some of the assailants being involved in those videos. And others that say, we've reported this. The school was aware of this culture that was brewing, but at other times nothing was done, or we told, well, we'll look into it, we'll investigate it. And this isn't just only at this particular school, Milnerton School that we're talking about. At other schools in South Africa, we have seen so many videos recorded. So now I want to talk about those children or whoever are recording these videos. They are the bystanders. They're aware of that. Your peers that see this happening from time to time. We've touched on the viciousness of some of these attacks, but the teachers as well, management being aware of that. Let's talk a little bit about the silent witnesses that sustain these cultures.
Look, I firstly must also clarify that my personal primary research in terms of primary data collection has not particularly been on bullying and so forth. My media publications have been a lot based on scholarly work produced by other scholars and professors and academics, and also in terms of relevant sociology, in terms of public sociology, and engaging with the public by informing them of understanding the dynamics of society. My observation is that, like I said earlier, and statistics have supported this as well, that a lot of it goes unheard, unseen, overlooked. It's easier. Schools don't have the time, they don't have the energy, they also don't have the know-hows how to actually curb, for example, the verbal abuse. My stance is that if your child is attending a school and has been victimized by a bullying scenario, the parent then will escalate it and it goes into the principal's office. The principal then should then dictate at that point what the process is in terms of punishment or accountability process or some sort of acknowledgement of the perpetrator. Nothing has been really documented in terms of a very few, it's a rare circumstances where we actually see and hear of the actual reprimands and what's in place in terms of rectifying or making the perpetrator far aware or accountable of his behavior patterns. Now, look, we've got a national school safety framework, for instance. Yes. And the whole purpose of the framework is to guide provinces, identify the threats, and create action plans more than anything. And part of the framework mandates that the school establishes a report in terms of evaluation and monitoring. Also, the mandate says schools should cultivate a positive school culture, a positive organizational culture, and build a partnership Build a partnership with the peers, with the learners, the teachers, and the parents. We cannot also, as a South African society, say that, it's as easy as that partnerships can be formed. We are living in this country through very challenging socio-economic pressures. Most government schools, both parents are working. They're not as hands-on with their children and children's schooling career as they should be. They work long hours, they are commuting long hours, and this is very applicable to schools located in the rural areas as well of South Africa, where you still have, initiated by the apartheid system, where you had the system of live-in domestic workers. The children are left within the community care or the care of aging grandparents to care for them or other caregivers, where you've got your dad that's working away from home in a transport company or working on the mines. So also historically, in terms of the way livelihoods have been structured in the country, how people are forced to go out there, earn a living, it has also impacted how hands-on or how available you are to be uh, at every beck and call of the school's request and all, and so forth.
Yes.
Parents too, I mean, they feel, you know what, we are paying school fees. This is what's expected. The school must sort it out. So my stance is that yes, you're paying school fees. It's it's everybody's responsibility. If your child is at the school, I believe it's everybody's responsibility to contribute towards developing that positive environment for the child and other learners.
I want to quickly share one of the viewers' comments here. Baldwin Hendricks, thanks so much for your comment. If you want to comment on what Dr. Shital is saying, we're talking obviously about what has been transpiring at Milnerton High, but as South Africans, how this is affecting us. So Baldwin writes, Doc, in terms of ethics, the philosophical study of moral principles that define right and wrong conduct, but good and bad behavior and fair and unfair actions. These learners know exactly what they have done and did even find pleasure in what they were doing, knowingly that what they were doing is wrong, but still continuing with their misconduct behavior. Based on what everyone have noticed, seeing this video, it's ongoing violence they have conducted. So why explaining and defending them? I don't think there is a defense of it, but I'm going to allow you to share your response to what he's saying. But I have seen on other social media platforms, people say they're hormonal, they're young men, they part of the rugby team, they need to assert their superiority, they're the jocks of the school, and all these reasons trying to explain the misconduct, as some people call it, the criminality others would refer to it.
I don't think we're actually defending their behavior, but what I'm saying to everybody is that we need to also understand where this kind of behavior stems from, what the roots are. And in order for us to actually understand what the roots and causes are, we are then able to actually identify a monitoring process and actually take it further. We are highlighting in this conversation the need for a collective governance process, a need for a collective contribution. And also, for me personally as well, are learners also really being educated about what is bullying, what is not bullying? Are they able to identify the various forms of abuse, or is it a normal practice? And if a practice is repeatedly normalized, it's continued, it becomes part of a life way and a culture within any society or within the school community. So if educators and your principal are not educating any of the young learners that, look, this is wrong, this behavior is not wrong, and if you're not encouraged that, look, so and so is swearing me, and he's swearing me in a language that I don't understand. I don't know how to respond to this. Why are children afraid to actually report these incidents, for instance? Are they not reporting them? And if they do reporting them, are they actually met with the right kind of supportive response? Because if they are not met with the right kind of support, they are then not going to complain to the educators and take a stance. We are also unaware when these kids leave the school premises. what they are exposed to by their peers in the streets of these children in their neighborhoods. Does the bullying continue after hours and then continues the next day on the school premises? So therefore, I also say, to what extent can we also hold the schools accountable? But if an incident is on the school's premises, it happens on the school's premises, especially during school hours, then I would completely say, you know what, the entire schooling governance leaders, the management, the principal, the educators are responsible for actually dispersing and having the skills or lacking the skills to actually tone an event like this down and disperse it. It should not have escalated to that extent. I mean, let's ask each other a simple question. Where was the bat hidden? That they weren't even aware that, you know what, this bat is actually used to perpetuate violence. Did he take the belt off his waist, for instance? Because corporal punishment has been forbidden in schools. So it's a difficult one because we don't know also, has this war been going on the streets and then continuing at school? Is there a bigger background towards it?
In the work that you have read and seen, and obviously the policies that is not only protected by the Schools Act, but the Constitution as well. If you look at the fact that we constantly have these incidents at various schools across the country, what, in your opinion, are the flaws that that makes it so much easier for this to happen? That there is a zero tolerance. That it's said this is what we're going to do, but it's not implemented. Where should we be changing? What should be are we aware of that makes us vulnerable for repetition of this? And that you can't then say, well, the School Act didn't address this. Where are the flaws? Where are the red flags for you that prop up this system?
I think firstly, and I've stressed this, and I think it's the third time I'm mentioning this. If bullying is just ignored and neglected and not identified by the educators, that is one thing. Also, if the learners are also encouraged by teachers to be complicit about it and complacent, that is the second thing. Also, how realistic is it in the school day? Are teachers not coping? We need to talk to them, to say to them, why, if you are, we're all human beings, end of the day. You've got a classroom of 40 to 50 learners, for instance. They are managing it. They're probably teaching multiple school subjects as well. Let's ask a teacher, how is it that you feel that you've missed this antagonism brewing within the class amongst the boys? Yes. Are they not governed when they're on the playground, for instance, during break time? Are the teachers or is there no educator or senior management team just walking around hovering to actually suss out, have feelers out? Are the boys getting along? Is there issues? What's going on? So I think also during the break times for me, schools need to be very on top of things. What's going on in the field? What is going on in the field? Don't just sit in your classroom and eat your sandwich. But at the same token, is it fair to expect that from a teacher that's teaching all hours of the day and to be vigilant and on duty during break time? They also want to have their tea and eat. So it's, in terms of the government school and the basic Department of Education, there needs to be a financial commitment and a structural commitment that takes place where the school management system is not only going to comprise of your administrative staff, your educators, and your principal, deputy principal, and heads of department. We actually need learner minders or child minders. And, if I remember in the 90s, and many schools have done away with this, we used to even have school counselors on the premises. It's now become, yes, some do, some don't. So here again, you see the inequality from school to school. And maybe we
True.
must go back and look at adopting those counseling positions back again, opening them up again. So that, and also maybe give them a dual role in terms of having a learner minder. If we have to look at children that come from impoverished backgrounds, many of them also would also be coming to school also with a traumatic and a psychological challenge or emotional burden. So we also don't know, for instance, how the simplest of types of communication can escalate based on their emotional well-being at that time,
Mm.
or rather unhealthy position of where they're at. But I
It's
think
interesting.
we should look at understanding that each child, each learner, every teenager at a young age needs to know what is self-respect. What do we identify as bullying?
Mm.
Is it okay to be sarcastic? Is it okay to be speaking derogative terms? Is it okay to insult my fellow classmate? What justifies that?
Mm.
You know, in primary school, a lot of the children are exposed to moral studies, if I'm not mistaken. Many of the children also have the option of doing biblical studies. And, you know, as we enter into the higher grades, it becomes optional, it's not a compulsory. But we need to also look at the schooling curriculum. In the same token, maybe it should be, you know, a overall developing curriculum, which leaves space for a little bit of a multilingualism, a little bit about moral conduct, moral behavior,
Mm.
self-worth, a
Mm.
confidence building perspective, for instance. And it's got to start at the younger levels. And the same token as well, you find the girl child is often bullied by the boy child in co-ed schools. Girl kids are often going and standing in the tuck shops for the boys. The boys are on the field, standing, waiting for the girlfriend, or I would just say classmate, to go and buy, give them money, just go and get my lunch and come back.
Mm.
So we need to educate our learners. What is bullying? What is not bullying? Do I need to participate in that? And ultimately, we need to develop the critical thinker. And how do you do that? You need to make them aware. But you know, it becomes a big challenge when you are sitting with limited resources.
Yes.
You're
Yes.
sitting with big classrooms. Teachers have to do double amount of work that they have just to get through the curriculum. Remember, when we're at a school, the key focus is not only character building and personality building and holistic child development, but at the forefront is teaching and learning, is teaching and learning of all the core school subjects.
Yes.
So there's a lot that needs to be done. But, you know, if we, for example, are going to experience corruption at the national feeding scheme level, the national nutrition scheme, for instance, and the children are not even getting meals that they're supposed to intend to, where are the funds are going to come from to actually have these learner minders to cultivate healthy school environments? A lot
I
depends
have
on the
to.
resources, uh, you know, the willingness and the stakeholders and each environment of the school.
I quickly want to refer um, back to Baldwin's comment. He said, and I think it's a valid question because I think we all ask ourselves this. He says, Doc, one last question. If this was your child, honestly speaking, would you still be capable to elaborate all these statements that you are explaining with the same moral and principles as a parent? And you are a parent, so you can answer him. Tell him how it affects us, all of us.
Yes, you know, it affects each and every one of us. And I am a parent. I'm a parent to a 13-year-old boy. And yes, I will reprimand when need be. I will enforce, you know, the importance of calling out bullying, calling out bad behavior, and also making him accountable for what he has contributed to if there's an unhealthy or a situation of him being called out for bullying and so forth. I personally also have experienced as a parent at debacles at school where you find some parents are more than happy to overlook the wrongs that their child does. And I'm not sure if they believe that this is a better way of parenting for their child, but I personally have a problem with that. I do. I do. If my child is wrong in any given way, in any circumstances, I do reprimand my child. I think that also is can be a contributing factor into how prevalent bullying has become. Are parents also taking the reins and saying, you know what, boy, this is not okay. This is not okay.
Yeah. It's all about the environments that you touched on earlier, that if it's not addressed, it becomes the norm. And we eventually become desensitized to it because we start seeing people do what works. If I get away with it, oh, I'll do it again. If I get away with it, oh, I'll add some more. And that is if we do not address it. You said at the beginning that it is so important to have partnerships. Let's talk a little bit about parents and teachers and the engagement that you expect between the two parties at schools, and particularly when we're dealing with an issue like bullying or assault or tensions that happen at schools.
Look, from my experience, and I'm going to highlight that this is my experience. It may not be the experience for every school, but I also can strongly say to you that most parent teacher meetings happen on average 3 to 4 times per year. In my opinion, it's not sufficient. Those meetings only touch predominantly on the academic progress and the academic capacities of your learner. Other than that, the parent is not informed about your child's behavior, about your child's mannerisms within the classroom. If they, for instance, identify the child is developing a different attitude, or if the child is functioning differently, I know there are certain special circumstances where the child is called in to meet with the principal, and they sat down and said, look, your child is not happy, your child hasn't been listening, he hasn't been attentive. A lot of the schools then will put it down to your child needs to see a occupational therapist, the child may be ADHD, the child may be is hyperactive, there's a concentration or a problem, there's a focus area. But what are we doing as well to actually encourage our child, to teach our child what it is and what it means to have healthy relationships? Because if we can inculcate and teach our children the value of having healthy relationships, and that bullying goes against that grain. And we need to also teach them the benefits of having a healthy relationship. And these are life skills that carry on for years on end. It actually takes people through their life on for years. So I am saying there needs to be some sort of greater platform. But there again as well, we need far more integration. Is it also fair to tax the educator to such an extent?
Yes.
There needs to be other avenues, other platforms, so that we can character build appropriately.
Yeah. You also said earlier that there are parents that feel because of the amount that they pay in school fees, they can abdicate and they can say, well, the teacher or the principal or the school must sort it out because I'm too busy having to do. And that is the reality in some households where you have single mothers who have to be everywhere and do everything and is literally is not able to. And then you have the scenarios where we have absent fathers in certain homes, and that in itself adds to that because there's no one emulating what it means to do this, to act this way. And mother can't be everywhere. She cannot be the man of the house, and then she must parent, and she must go work. It becomes a lot.
I just recently completed a study with 3 schools
Mm.
in eSekelani, the King Shetwayo district. And the number of child-headed households in that area is escalating for the simple reasons that I articulated earlier on in our discussion, where mom and dad are away in Durban City, for instance, engaging in employment or informal employment, and the children are left to see to themselves. So they predominantly have their first two meals at their schools, and the last meal of the day, they are left to fend for themselves or have a snack and so forth. From the dietary perspective, they're not eating, the full recommended dietary meal for the day. Okay. And the reality is that they are left by themselves. So this also contributes to the lack of understanding of what it takes to be a very mindful, active, moral citizen. And, from a young age as well, these children are now developing this attitude. You know what? I have to fight to survive. I've got to fight for my meal in the night. I have to fight. So the behavior can, in certain circumstances, also motivated by need for survival. A stance that, you know what, I have to be strong. I don't see the need to respect you. I will do what it takes to get ahead and do what I need to do. So, if we go
I've
back
got to
to
crush
basics in
you before you
society,
crush me.
and if you go back to your basics, I think everyone is quite familiar with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And your basics are, your shelter, your food. And, it's only when those basic needs are met that one can really engage in self-actualization, the learning process of themselves, the self-awareness, understanding one's own behavior, and so forth. I personally have, I feel very sad in terms of what our children in the rural and impoverished areas are experiencing right now. So it's a difficult one. But at the same token, my stance is that children that are sitting and coming from better socioeconomic circumstances, where they're having their basic needs met and so forth, can move up that hierarchy of personal growth, character building, self-actualization, and be developed further. Where it can take place in those areas and in the urban areas and even in the private schools, make no mistake, private school learners too are also victims and perpetrators of bullying. It's
Very
happening
true.
amongst all the areas in South Africa, all the provinces, all the classes. So
There's no exemption yet.
there's no exception. There's absolutely no exception. I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that, hey, you know what? I'm a teenage boy. I'm finding my way. I'm growing. I'm pushing boundaries now in terms of my personal development. And like you highlighted earlier on, whatever you can get away with, I will get away with. And it's okay. So we've really got to clamp down with stringent repercussions at every
I hear
school.
you. I've got
And we need to be
another.
very aware of what is going on during break time. What is
Yes.
going on during break time? Because I personally believe that a lot of this happens when they're outside of the classroom, when there's no teacher
No
within view of
monitoring.
them. That's
Yes,
right.
no monitoring. We've seen it. And that's what touches on what you said earlier on, the little snide comments, the little push and the shove, the body shaming, mask as a
Yes.
compliment. It's levels, and you want to see, all right, am I pushing your buttons? Not yet. Right, let me try this, let me try that. And our children are also not equipped, they are not skilled to recognize it. Baldwin is apologizing. Baldwin, you have no need to apologize, because I think what you are saying really is indicative of what others are feeling and experiencing. And let's talk about it then, rather just have these little conversations offline. Let's put it out there in the open so that we can address it, so that we can no longer say, well, we did not know. And here is Dr. Sheetal to address it because of her vast experience, the research she's done, the books she's read. I mean, she's heavy in academia and so many hats, we can't even get to everything. But let me read what he says. Please excuse me for all the questions asked, but in addition, I need to know, what role does empathy training or social emotional learning play in reducing bullying? I think also add to that emotional intelligence, because we've said earlier on, you know, You want your child to feel free and to feel safe in those environments, particularly at school. But we also know, we touched on, not all of that happens at home. And sometimes it doesn't happen in a classroom. Some teachers are not equipped to deal with it. Let's not kid ourselves. Not everybody, just because they're a teacher, are brilliant at what they do. Some are there because they want to get paid a salary. Let's talk about the softer, so-called softer skills, but that helps you, enables you to navigate your environment just a little bit better. Dr. Sheetal?
Yes, it's actually very important. And that's what I've been also punting, is that our learners also need to understand that there's value in respecting each other. And
Mm,
how how we feel is also pertinent to the way we then influence our behavioral actions as well. So, in my opinion, within at some point, children need to learn what is hate, what is love. Let's just go back to basics. What is respect? How do you speak to one another? How are you being kind? How do I treat my classmate as a brother? How do I treat my classmate as a sister? And at the formation, let's look at working on developing the importance of people, the role of people in
yes.
our lives. Because I also believe, a young learner with emotional intelligence, they are emotionally immature.
Mm,
So a young learner may not know how to respond appropriately, or how can I actually explain? Respond appropriate, or rather take a stand for themselves in an appropriate manner. So the easiest thing would be, if they are not fully aware of how to respond, they would respond in the same derogative way or the negative way that they have been spoken to.
two.
It's a mirror that reflects a
True.
mirror. Remember, children learn from experiences. So if they are sworn at or insulted, they are going to retaliate in the same way.
Absolutely.
And it takes maturity for a child to say, you know what, I shouldn't respond to that. I'm hurt.
I'm not
The
choosing that
child will say,
behavior.
you know what,
Yes.
you hurt me, I have to hurt you back. So that is what
Mm,
we need to avoid, is to teach our children, how does one respond to it. Yes, the children are often told, if you're unhappy, you've got a problem, come and talk to me, and tell the educator and tell the teacher in the classroom. My question is, how does each educator deal with these circumstances? Because often, there's number one, they don't have the time and they may not have the skills to manage this. So they may just say, you know what, I'm sorry you're experiencing it, and they would brush it aside.
yes.
Also, calling the perpetrator in and giving him a 2-minute speech, and then the issue is resolved. Meanwhile, the kids are still having it out at break time, when they go home, the next day, and it will continue and erode until the verbal abuse results in aggressive reaction.
Mm,
And so one regressive reaction encourages another aggressive reaction. And then you have escalated of extreme violence like what we experience now.
yes.
So children need to be taught. Even if somebody is bad to me within the environment, he's part of my school. The ethos is brotherhood. He's got a problem. He's probably got a problem. Maybe I'm not the problem. Should I be
True.
responding in the way he is spoken to? Why I should not be mirroring what I experienced?
Mm, mm,
For me personally, this is the basic way of building, holistic character, building some sort of awareness, emotional intelligence at a young age. It's a tough one. It's a tough one because also
I'm
we don't know as well, what the child is learning in their home environment either.
true. True. What's been happening in that environment that has spilled over, or where that kind of behavior that's displayed at school, where that has been condoned and it has been made to believe, but it's okay, this is the way we roll, this is the way we operate, and you think that that is acceptable, that's the norm because it's happening at home. My friendship circle, they tolerate me, so what's your problem? Can't you take a joke? That kind of setup that rewards bad behavior and does not address it at all. I want
Yes,
to,
and
as we continue, Dr. Chital, sorry.
yes, I mean, look, I mean, as a child myself, I also experienced my fair share of bullying in the verbal abuse form.
Yes.
And, during the era that I grew up as well, the support was minimal within my school. And and you are taught to a certain degree, but it becomes problematic when it's repetitive as well. It's really
Yeah.
problematic.
What are we missing in this conversation in South Africa when we talk about bullying? What should we be more cognizant of, in your opinion?
Unfortunately, I did sort of explain there are multiple reasons as to why we are where we are at in terms of bullying in this country.
Mm.
We also need to be aware that the deviant behavior also comes from a need. Some of the boys as well, they are engaging in deviant behavior as a way of life. I mean, they're stealing after school to survive, to eat, because sometimes in the rural areas there's no food at home. Okay. Parallel to that as well, we look at other forms of deviance of substance abuse, alcohol abuse, which also contributes towards aggression. And that is also another problem for a lot of schools where, is there appropriate evaluation monitoring processes in place? Are they identifying if there's substance abuse happening in the boys' toilets? Is there alcohol on the school premises? I mean, if we look at the areas here in KwaZulu-Natal, Phoenix, for instance, recently the community was mourning the loss of a sugar daddy, drug peddler. And sugars as a drug, as a substance, is highly addictive. And there's a lot of youth that are on the sugars. Are they consuming the sugars, going to school? So this also alters the behavior, impacts the behavior, contributes towards aggression, contributes towards mood swings, anxiety,
Mm. Mm.
depression, which also encourage perpetrators to maybe behave in an abusive manner. So
Mm.
for me, monitoring and reporting is the core of it. There needs to be such a very strong security, safety, as that when the child enters the school environment, the kids need to be monitored at all given points, even from the smallest of bickering to no bickering to what have you. Everything needs to be monitored, and we need to be fair. It's not entirely the educator's job to be monitoring outside the classroom as well. It's a lot. So
Yes.
that for me is very central to cultivating a path forward in dealing with this overwhelming, difficult issue.
A lot to still talk about, a lot that we still are grappling with in our schools and as a South African society. Thank you so much for being available tonight to just help us to understand where we're coming from, what is lacking in this conversation, because there are so many aspects that we even haven't touched on tonight. But I really want to thank you for your time. I know that it wasn't on short notice, but I appreciate that you were available and shared your insights tonight, Dr. Chital. I hope that we are able to talk in the future again. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much. Good evening.
So if you take care. If you want to know a little bit more about Dr. Chital's Bula's work, you can Google her. You can visit her website. I said earlier she's an academic at the University of Zululand. She is a national columnist. You might have read some of her articles and her insights that she's written. She's the director of Stellar Maths as well. So she's a researcher. There's a lot to unpack that she touched on this evening. If you've enjoyed this conversation, enjoyed is such a lame word. If you found this meaningful, if you found it insightful, please recommend it. Please tag someone, share this discussion and some of the aspects that she touched on so that we can have a bigger conversation. So that we don't hide from some of the things that we actually do need to confront, that we say to ourselves, you know what, I actually can do more. So I really appreciate, Baldwin. Thank you for your contributions, all your questions. I have no problem with you asking questions, especially if it's contributing to the discussion. Not everybody are comfortable raising an opinion or even taking issue with an opinion of a guest. And I welcome healthy disagreements or difference of opinion. That is fine, as long as we show up for the conversation, show up for each other, speak our truth respectfully. That is what we're trying to do with Amplify with Lynette, amplifying the issues, the shedding and putting a light on it, so that those voices that we ignore, that feel marginalized, that they find a platform, or to at least a space to air it, to address it, so that we can talk about it. Besides this interview, there are so many other interviews on this channel that I know you would find of value. If you have time, please like and subscribe. Please comment. Please share. It's really important that we have a conversation. There's another conversation that I had earlier today, and I will hopefully be posting it tomorrow, with Ivor Swartz. He's a youth pastor, and I think he's from Cape Town. He's a youth pastor, but he's also a motivational speaker. And he's been on a week, almost like a tour, at various schools in the West Rand here in Johannesburg. And I spoke to him about the vibe at some of these meetings, what children are telling him and what they are sharing with him. And it is so powerful. It is so powerful. And I was hoping that we were going to listen to it earlier, but it hasn't. I have to finish the editing and then I'm going to post it. But it is so valuable to have that conversation, because we focused a lot tonight on the perpetrator, the assailants, and the victims. We touched on that. But we didn't talk enough about the passerbys, those that are standing on the sidelines, those that are filming these assaults, these incidences, these fights, this traumatic and brutal and demeaning fights that we've seen. We haven't spoken about that mentality as well, because all of that plays into what we are sustaining, what we are allowing in our schools and outside our school yards and grounds. So that is a conversation that I would recommend that you'll also listen to. If it's not tonight, then definitely tomorrow. But I will try and link it also to this discussion that we had with Dr. Shital Bula. Thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Thank you for the likes. And I hope that we get to speak to each other quite soon. This is becoming regular. We're going to have more discussions, and I can show up now because other stuff has been taken care of. Oh, that's a whole another story to share. Thank you for your time. Have